we tend to think about sort of design objects or typography, or we have this. We jump quickly to aesthetics when we're talking about design. And actually, I think one of the still as yet unsurfaced truths about design is so much of its power is not necessarily in how things look. It's how they're engineered and how they're constructed, how they're composed.
This is Velocitize Talks, and I'm Eric Jones. I'm here with Nicolas Roope, who's the co-founder of Plumen, the co-founder of Poke, and the co-founder of Levi's. It's great to have you here.
Thank you.
Nicolas, you're the founder of Plumen. How did you decide to do that, given your experience on the digital side, but then also, being quite involved on the design side as well?
Plumen's is a product business. We're a lighting company, and people often ask me that question. Because they tend to know me from my reputation in the sort of digital world as a creative director, which I've been doing for pretty much 20 years now. It's quite a rare breed who've been around for so long. And my answer is simply that I had a product idea, but with my knowledge of how the digital landscape works, I understand products in a different way, and I understand brands, reputations, and stories, and their transmission through kind of digital channels in a completely different way to how a traditional kind of marketer or product business might operate.
Given that experience over the course of the past 20 years, how do you think the whole process of brand building has evolved over that period?
Brand building, for the most part, kind of hasn't evolved. It's almost resisted the change around it, and you can still go to lots of branding shops around the world and hear a conversation or hear a pitch that you might have heard 20 years ago. I think, however, there obviously are a lot of companies and brands and businesses that have reshaped their approach to branding in response to the opportunities of digital. And I think when you think about the sort of pure play, digital startups, social media platforms, and those things, they're sort of exceptions. But if you think about this kind of new breed of product businesses that are emerging, these sort of challenger brands, craft beer, and all these sort of emergent, names and brands that are really kind of punching above their weight, then it's a new kind of approach. It's a new way of thinking about branding, and as a consequence, kind of the idea of what branding is evolving.
It's a little bit of a double-edged sword, though, isn't it? Right, where these challenger brands can instantly be global, but at the same time, they're competing at a global basis.
When you see these brands rising rapidly, it's incredibly exciting, but there is a question I have about the sustainability of that. For instance, say Instagram, for example, there was a moment when you had enormous organic reach, where if you're a little bit ahead of the curve, you could build big communities very, very quickly, and then the pipe got shut, and that door got closed. So I think these, when you see these very kind of spiky success stories that are quite short-lived, there's usually a concern I have going forward about actually how do you turn that into something sustainable.
One of the things that, in fact, helps most businesses be sustainable is actually culture, and getting that right from the start. Tell us a little bit about how you approach that with Poke. And how you continue that today within Publicis.
We've shed skins, year after year, and we're constantly renewing ourselves and reinventing ourselves. And I think that challenges culture in a way, because your culture is not defined by the continuity of particular people or particular groups, because they're always sort of turning through the business. Not that our journey's terrible; it's just like it just happens over time. So for Poke, we've always had this passion for digital. We've always seen creativity as a means to kind of unlock potential that otherwise hasn't been seen, for our clients or just for ourselves.
Yeah. Did you ever sort of articulate a number of maxims or adages that sort of laddered up to that purpose?
We're not big on maxims and adages, only because they end up tying you in knots, and something that sort of sounded true one day ends up sounding awfully old-fashioned the next. So I think we always try and stay slightly deliberately vague.
Speaking of creativity, you're also a designer. You've contributed to wallpaper. Do you think design is finally getting its due in the tech space? People like Johnny Ive have obviously helped bring it to the fore. And we're seeing the power of great design probably more so today than ever before, or was it always there and maybe just not highlighted enough before?
We tend to think about sort of design objects or typography, or we have this. We jump quickly to aesthetics when we're talking about design. And actually, I think one of the still as yet unsurfaced truths about design is so much of its power is it's not necessarily in how things look. It's how they're engineered and how they're constructed, how they're composed. And we're not. 10 years ago we'd be designing a web page. Now we're creating ecosystems and we're trying to create coherent experiences that run across networks. But it's not design like typography or designing a chair. It's a different kind of quality of it's a different discipline.
Right. I love the story of the submarine chair, the aluminum chair, where the drop test was out of a second floor or third story building, and if it didn't smash, like, that was going to be good enough for the U.S. Navy. And then it's gone on to become one of the most iconic designs of all time.
Yeah.
Switching a little bit from design and aesthetics, 10 years ago we were all talking about building great websites, and now we're talking about designing immersive experiences, incredible digital experiences. Given the advent of some of these newer ways of interfacing with brands, voice, AR, VR, how do you see that playing out in the marketplace?
I think if you laid them all out on a huge sheet and as a client, and ask yourself, how am I going to use all of these to connect with my customers? It's so bewildering, and I think a lot of people don't even know where to start, and consequently don't even start. Mm-hmm. It's not complicated when you look at the world through the eyes of users and customers. It sort of simplifies it greatly, and it allows you to see that really what we're trying to create in all of these kind of instances, all these disparate places, is actually a kind of coherent journey.
Do you think there are brands that do the sort of omni-channel experience extraordinarily well? Which ones would you highlight?
I mean, the sort of brandy brands, the kind of the funky brands who are great at joining it all up would be, people like Red Bull, who I think just are so clear on their passion and excitement for what their brand is about, and obviously what their brand is about is a much bigger category than the product, mm-hmm. Because of all the things they've invested in, and the community they've really built around that brand. Often if you've built a brand with the kind of traditional building blocks, and you think that a logo and a branded bag and some collateral and a nice web page sort of does your brand, it just doesn't. You need a much more clearer kind of drive and purpose and mission and passion that directs everything you're doing.
We all want personalization, but we don't want it to be creepy. So it's kind of your guiding light as you approach those personalized experiences for brands.
I think there is a way to be respectful with data. I think what the big controversies over the last year have really centered on kind of abuse of that relationship, of that promise. So I think what's an absolute necessary process we've been through is to recognise that data is important, and that it shouldn't be abused, mm-hmm. and that as organisations, as an industry, we need to be really we stand to lose a lot more than we stand to gain by losing that trust. You obviously co-founded the Lovey Awards, and I'm kind of curious from that perspective, do you notice any differences between how, let's say a US agency would approach, a digital engagement versus, here in the UK or in Europe? And then also, on that issue of data, there's sort of two sides to the argument, like, will the data privacy sort of hinder creativity, or do you think it actually could result in quite a bit more innovation? It's very hard to put your finger on, whether those differences are just a consequence of the culture, just different cultures, different languages that manifest in a different type of proposition, because it's the internet, and because we're dealing with digital things. There's a globalness to those and practitioners who've grown up wherever they are in Europe have really fed off inspiration that's in its essence global. The second question you asked about the increasing sort of regulation around privacy and whether that was a challenge or whether that was what impact that would have on creativity. I'd speculate in the long run, I think it will really help creativity. Obviously, in the short term, there's just because of the sort of the expedience by which we need to resolve the problem, tends to limit the amount of discussion around how that's implemented. So it will just be implemented at kind of any cost. So obviously, as far as the cost to experience, as far as maybe opportunities that could come about in that process of shoring up your policies and how those things manifest, that could kind of squeeze out lots of good things.
So I have a question on entrepreneurship, since you bring it up and since you've been responsible for founding quite a number of different things. In the United States, California tends to dominate the conversation. In Europe, London tends to dominate the conversation. Do you think in the future we'll see sort of a diaspora from those areas and more of a balancing across the world?
Yeah, totally. I think technology has to such a huge extent already distributed opportunity like never before, and not just in terms of the raw mechanics of starting a business and doing business. You used to have to go to events and mix with people to get the inspiration. Now you can sit in Siberia and still kind of participate in a way that might start you on a path. And I think we've still, it still feels like these big clusters, but I mean there are lots of things that are happening outside that don't have nothing to do with us here.
Switching gears a little bit and going into technology, there's so many more tools that are available for you. We were talking about the explosion in MarTech solutions and things like that. Whether it's more powerful technologies like AI and machine learning and that type of thing. What are some of the newer tools that have you extremely excited in terms of being able to do things that you were never able to do before?
Programmatic has obviously been a big topic of conversation for some years now. And I mean, it still feels like it's nascent somehow. I mean, it doesn't feel, when you search for case studies, I don't find, volumes of amazing case studies of advertisers using programmatic really, really brilliantly. Mm-hmm. But I think I think it's going to run and run, and we've only just scratched the surface of actually what role that will play in the marketing mix and the communications mix in the future.
Do you think we spent some time talking about transparency? I wanted to talk a little bit about purpose. Yeah. It's obviously more and more. It's a powerful way for consumers to connect with brands, and increasingly it's motivating a lot of their purchase decisions and other actions that they may take with respect to brands. Have we gotten to the point where it's almost at that point where a brand has to take a stand on various issues that are core to its business or sort of tangential to its business? Or do you think it's okay for brands, even today, to sort of step out of that entire arena?
Why purpose has become such a talked up feature of the new brand is because purpose gives a company direction that pushes that conversation. We make this product. We believe in this. This belief both underpins and reinforces the relevance of our product, but it also underpins the relevance of our behavior in the world and why we do things the way we do things. And so when somebody comes to criticize that, we might push back and say, we do this because this is important to us and this is because it underpins our product. Mm-hmm. But it's creating a living brand, not this kind of static, controlled, structured, rule-based brand.
One of the questions I love asking is whether there's a book that you would like to recommend to our viewers.
Okay, I'll give you two, actually.
Yeah.
One is just so obvious, but I think that's why I want to recommend it, which is obviously Sapiens. Mm-hmm. And I reckon 20% of people listening may not have read it yet, but that's what I want to sweep up, that last 20%, because this is a book, as a human being, we all need to read. It's like our own it's like a letter to ourselves from humanity. And then the one I've just started reading is Life 3.0 by Max Tegmark, which is very focused on AI, and I think it just helps again, sort of, rather than it being a sort of technological breakdown of AI. It's looking at the broader context and what the real ramifications are of the technology.
Mm-hmm. Nicolas, thank you so much for your time today. Really appreciate it.
Thanks. It's good fun.
That was Nicolas Roope, the co-founder of Plumen, the co-founder of Poke, and the co-founder of the Lovies.